Hey guys, as you can see, I brought little Scrat on. Well, he's not so little. Look at that tail. I don't know how long he'll hold still for us, but he was in a very loving mood today, and so he's been out for several hours. He kind of got me a few times on my arm. It's okay. Such a good boy. I thought I'd bring him on so you all could see him. He's gotten so big. He's much bigger than Delilah. Delilah's he's a good boy. He's a good boy. I'll move this. Oh, it's okay. It's okay. Shh, shh. I know. He makes these little noises. It's so cute. You want to say hi to everybody? Say hi. Hi. He's a big boy. Let's see what. Oh, he's gonna run around a little bit. Okay, guys. I thought I would come on and read another story for you guys, and most of the books that I would be reading to you are actually in my classroom, and we are not allowed to go into our classrooms right now because of the COVID-19 crisis. And so they actually turned off our key fobs throughout the whole county, so we're not allowed to enter our classrooms. So I went through my books at home, and even though most of my favorite children's books are at school, I found this one. It says Mrs. If you can see it without shining, Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of Nimh. And that's Scrat you're hearing in the background. He's walking on the floor. Anyway, and the author is Robert O'Brien. This novel has actually been around for many years, and they actually made a they actually made a movie based off this book. It's called The Secret of Nimh, I believe, is actually very, very popular movie. It was an animated movie. From what I've heard, I've never actually seen the movie. So from what I've heard, they did change it a bit. I will put links in the description box below so that you can, if you would like to purchase the book or rent the movie. Once again, the movie, from what I understand, is very different from the actual book. But as far as like putting actual things in Google Classroom for you to do with this, I haven't quite decided yet because I still have things from Hachiko Waits to put up. And so I thought I would just go ahead and come on and read to you guys today. And I thought maybe tomorrow, I have scheduled at 1 o'clock tomorrow for a Zoom class. So hopefully you all will be able to do that because I would love to see as many faces as I can. But for those of you that can't, you can still watch here. And I've had several requests to continue to do some videos, and so I will. I've thought about maybe tomorrow. I know I have the Zoom class at 1 o'clock, but I thought about making a science video tomorrow. And give me some ideas of something that you would maybe like me to do as far as science videos. I can do just about anything. I can use my dining room. It's a nice big area there that I can use that space to actually do some different experiments. A lot of my supplies that I normally have to do those experiments, though, are usually at school. So, but I still have quite a few things here. So there's definitely some things I can do. I'm so used to doing a lot of experiments, and we haven't been able to do those. So I got off topic, so let's get back on topic here. So once again, I'm going to start reading this novel. It's called Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of Nimh. And it is an older novel, as I said. It's a little thicker than Hachiko Waits, so it's going to take a little longer. So I will just see how the chapters go. I might read 1 or 2. I might read 3 a day. I'm not sure yet. I'm just going to see how it goes and see if you guys like the novel. Once again, if you want to see more videos, I need you to hit the like button and also the subscribe button, and I will put more up for you. Okay? All right, guys, let's get started. All righty. There are a few illustrations in this book, but it's not the same as Hachiko Waits. They're tiny little illustrations, and there's not that many. It's a different book. It's a different book, but it's a wonderful book as well. So, Mrs. Frisby, the head of a family of field mice, lived in an underground house in a vegetable garden of a farmer named Mr. Fitzgibbon. It was a winter house such as some field mice move to when food becomes too scarce, and the living too hard in the woods and pastures. In the soft earth of a bean, potato, black-eyed pea, and asparagus patch, there is plenty of food left over for mice after the human crop have been gathered. Mrs. Frisby and her family were especially lucky in the house itself. It was a slightly damaged cinder block, the hollow kind with 2 oval holes through it. It had somehow been abandoned in a garden during the summer and lay almost completely buried with only a bit of one corner showing above ground, which is how Mrs. Frisby had discovered it. It lay on its side in such a way that the solid parts of the block formed a roof and a floor, both waterproof, and the hollows made 2 spacious rooms, lined with bits of leaves, grass, cloth, cotton fluff, feathers, and other soft things Mrs. Frisby and her children had collected. The house stayed dry, warm and comfortable all winter. A tunnel to the surface earth of the garden, dug so that it was slightly larger than a mouse and slightly smaller than a cat's foreleg, provided access, air, and even a fair amount of light to the living room. The bedroom formed by the second oval, and the warm but dark even at midday. A short tunnel through the earth behind the block connected the 2 rooms. Although she was a widow, her husband had died only the preceding summer. Mrs. Frisby was able, through luck and hard work, to keep her family there. There were 4 children, happy and well fed. January and February were the hardest months. The sharp, hard cold that begun in December lasted until March, and by February, with help from the birds, the asparagus roots were frozen into stone, and the potatoes had been thawed and refrozen so many times they had acquired a slimy texture and a rancid taste. Rancid basically is rotten. Still, the Frisbys made the best of what there was, and the one way or another they kept from being hungry. Then one day at the very end of February, Mrs. Frisby's youngest son, Timothy, fell sick. That day began with a dry, bright, icy morning. Mrs. Frisby woke up early, as she always did. She and her family slept close together in a bed of down, fluff, and bits of cloth they had gathered warm as a ball of fur. She stood up carefully so as not to awaken the children and walked quietly through the short tunnel to the living room. Here it was not so warm, but not really cold either. She could see the light from the filtering down. She could see the light from the She could see from the light filtering down the entrance tunnel that the sun was up and bright. She looked at the food in her pantry, a hollowed-out space lined with small stones in the earth behind the living room. There was plenty of food for breakfast and lunch and dinner, too, for that matter, but still the sight depressed her, for it was the same tiresome fare they had been eating every day, every meal for the last month. She wished she knew where to find a bit of green lettuce or a small egg or a taste of cheese or a corn muffin. There were eggs in plenty not far off in the hen house, but hens and hen eggs are too big for a field mouse to cope with. And besides, between the garden and the hen house, there was a wide sward of shrubs and grass, some of it's grown up quite tall. Cat territory. She climbed up the tunnel, emerging whiskers first, and looked around warily. The air was sharp, and there was white frost thick on the ground and on the dead leaves at the edge of the wood across the garden patch. Mrs. Frisby set off over the gently furrowed earth, and when she reached the fence, she turned right, skirting the border of the forest, searching with her bright round eyes for a bit of carrot, a frozen parsnip, or something green. But there was nothing green at that time of year but the needles on the pine trees and the leaves on the holly, neither of which a mouse, or any animal for that matter, can eat. And then, straight in front of her, she did see something green. She had reached the far corner of the garden, and there, at the edge of the woods, where it met the fence, was a stump. In the stump there was a hole, and out of the hole protruded something that looked a little bit like a leaf, but was not. Mrs. Frisby had no trouble at all going through the cattle wire fence, but she approached the hole cautiously. If the stump was hollow, as it seemed to be, there was no telling who or what might be living in it. A foot or so from the hole she stopped, stood still, and watched and listened. She could hear no sound, but from there she could see what the green was. It was, in fact, a yellowish-brownish green, a bit of a corn shuck. But what was a corn shuck doing there? The cornfield was in a different part of the farm altogether, away beyond the pasture. Mrs. Frisby hopped closer and then carefully crept up the side of the stump and peered inside. When her eyes got used to the dark, she saw that she had found a treasure, a winter's supply of food, carefully stored and then, for some reason, forgotten and abandoned. But stored by whom? A raccoon, perhaps? Not very likely, so far from the stream. More likely a squirrel or a groundhog. She knew that both of these felt free to help themselves to the new corn each year, and that they were strong enough to carry ears away and store them. But whoever had done this, why had they then abandoned the store? And then she remembered back in November there had come from near the edge of the woods the sound that sends all of the animals in the forest shivering to their hiding places, the sound of hunters' guns and shooting, the sound that is accompanied for someone by a fiery, stabbing pain, and then he never needs his stored food again. Still, since Mrs. Frisby did not even know what kind of animal it had been, much less his name, she could not shed many tears over him, and food was food. It was not the green lettuce she had longed for, but she and her children were extremely fond of corn, and there were 8 large ears in the stump, a noble supply for a mouse family. Down under the corn she could also see a pile of fresh peanuts from still another part of the farm, some hickory nuts, and a stack of dried, sweet-smelling mushrooms. With her 4 paws and sharp teeth, she pulled off a part of the husk from that top ear of corn and folded it double to serve as a crude carrying bag. Then she pulled loose as many of the yellow corners as she could easily lift, and putting in the shuck bag, she hopped off briskly for home. She would come back for more after breakfast and bring the children for help. She backed down the tunnel entrance to her house, tail first, pulling the corn after her and cheerfully as she went, "Children, wake up! See what I have brought for breakfast, a surprise!" They came hurrying out, rubbing their eyes in excitement, for any kind of surprise in food was a rare and festive thing in the cold dead of winter. Teresa, the oldest, came first. Crowding close behind her was Martin, the biggest, a strong, quick mouse, dark-haired and handsome like his poor father. Then came Cynthia, the youngest, a slim, pretty girl mouse, light-haired and, in fact, a little light-headed as well, and over-fond of dancing. Here's a small illustration you can see. There's Mrs. Frisby and the little ones. It's cute. "Where is it?" she said. "What is it? Where's the surprise?" "Where is Timothy?" asked Mrs. Frisby. "Mother," said Teresa, concerned. "He says he's sick and can't get up." "Nonsense. Martin, tell your brother to get out of bed at once or he'll get no breakfast." Martin ran to the bedroom obediently, but came back in a moment alone. "He says he feels too sick and he doesn't want any breakfast, even a surprise. I felt his forehead and it's burning hot." "Oh dear," said Mrs. Frisby. "That sounds as if he is really sick." Timothy had on occasion been known to think he was sick when he was really not. "Here, you may all have your breakfast, save Timothy's, and I'll go and see what's wrong." She opened up the green carrying bag and put the corn on the table, dividing it into 5 equal shares. The noise you're hearing in the back is Scrat. He's climbing in the window. Let's see, where did I leave off? The dining table was a smooth piece of lath supported on both ends by stone. "Corn!" shouted Martin. "Oh, Mother, where did you ever get it?" "Eat up," said Mrs. Frisby, "and a little later I'll show you because there's a lot more where this came from." And she disappeared into the little hallway that led to the bedroom. "A lot more," Martin repeated as he sat down with his 2 sisters. "That sounds like enough to last till moving day." "I hope so," said Cynthia. "When is moving day anyway?" 2 weeks, said Martin authoritatively. "Maybe 3. "Oh, Martin, how do you know?" protested Teresa. "What if it stays cold? Anyway, Timothy isn't well enough." At this dreadful thought so easily raised, they all grew worried and fell silent. Then Cynthia said, "Teresa, you shouldn't be so gloomy. Of course he'll be well. He's just got a cold, that's all." She finished eating her corn, and so did the others. In the bedroom, Mrs. Frisby felt Timothy's forehead. It was indeed hot and damp with sweat. She took his pulse and dropped his wrist in alarm at what she felt. "Do you feel sick to your stomach?" "No, Mother, I feel all right, only cold. And when I sit up, I get dizzy, and I can't get my breath too well." Mrs. Frisby peered anxiously at his face and would have looked at his tongue, but in the dark room she could see no more than the dim outline of his head. He was the thinnest of her children, and he had a dark complexion like his father and brother. He was narrow of face, his eyes were unusually large and bright, and shone with the intensity of his thought when he spoke. He was, Mrs. Frisby's knew, the smartest and most thoughtful of her children, though she would never have admitted this aloud. But he was also the frailest, and when colds or flus or virus infections came around, he was the first to catch them and the slowest to recover. He was also, perhaps as a result, something of a hypochondriac. A hypochondriac is somebody who thinks they're sick all the time. I know adults that way. I also know kids that way, that they constantly feel like anything that happens that they're going to get it, or that they don't feel well, or if they get the sniffles, they immediately think they have the flu, and that's what a hypochondriac is. But there was no doubt he was really sick this time. His head felt as if he had a high fever, and his pulse was very fast. "Poor Timothy, lie back down and keep covered." She spread over him some of the bits of cloth they used as blankets. "After a while, we'll fix you a pallet in the living room so you can lie out where it's light. I found a fine supply of corn this morning, more than we can eat for the rest of the winter. Would you like some?" "No, thank you. I am not hungry. Not now." He closed his eyes, and in a few minutes he went to sleep. But it was a restless sleep in which he tossed and moaned continually. In mid-morning, Mrs. Frisby, Martin, and Cynthia set off for the stump to carry home some more of the corn and some peanuts and mushrooms. The hickory nuts they would leave, for they were too hard for mouse jaws to crack and too tedious to gnaw enough. They left Teresa home to look after Timothy, whom they had wrapped up and helped into a temporary sickbed in the living room. When they returned at lunchtime carrying heavy loads of food, they found her near tears from worry. Timothy was much worse. His eyes looked wild and strange from the fever. He trembled continuously, and each breath he took sounded like a gasp for life. Teresa said, "Oh, Mother, I'm so glad you're back. He's been having nightmares and shouting about monsters and cats, and when I talk to him, he doesn't hear me at all." Excuse me. Not only was Timothy not hearing with his ears, his eyes, though wide open, were not seeing, or if they were, he was not recognizing what they saw. When his mother tried to talk to him, to hold his hand and ask him how he felt, he stared past her as if she did not exist. Then he gave out a long, low moan and seemed to be trying to say something, but the words would not form properly and made no sense at all. The other children stared in frightened silence. Finally, Martin asked, "Mother, what is it? What's wrong with him?" "He is terribly ill. His fever is so high he's become delirious. There is nothing for it. I will have to go and see Mr. Agnes. Timothy must have medicine." Delirious means you kind of like hallucinate, and a lot of the things that you say don't seem real, and a lot of people that are gravely ill sometimes become delirious. We're on to, I suppose it is chapter 2. It's called Mr. Ages. Mr. Ages was a white mouse who lived across the farm and beyond in a house that was part of a brick wall. The wall lined the basement of what had once been a large farmhouse. The farmhouse itself had burned down so many years ago that nobody could remember what it had looked like nor who had lived there. The basement remained a great square hole in the ground, and in its crumbling walls, protected from the wind and snow, numerous small creatures lived. In summer there were snakes, dangerous to Mrs. Frisby, but there was no need to worry about them in winter. Just the same, it was a long, hard journey and can be risky unless she was extremely cautious. It was so far, in fact, that Mrs. Frisby would not ordinarily have set out so late in the day for fear that the dark would catch her before she got back. But Timothy obviously could not wait until the next day, so only 5 minutes after she had announced that she must go, she was gone. If he had been able to follow her nose, that is, to take the shortest route to where Mr. Ages lived, her journey would have been easy enough. But since that would have led her close to the farmhouse and the barn, and since the cat stalked those grounds relentlessly, she had to plot a much more roundabout way, circling the whole wide farmyard and sticking to the fringe of the woods. She loped along briskly, moving in the easy, horse-like canter mice use when they are trying to cover ground. Her progress was almost completely noiseless. She chose her path where the earth was bare or where grass grew, and she avoided dead leaves which would rustle and crack even under her small weight. Always she kept an eye out for hiding places, logs, roots, stones, things to scurry under if she might meet a larger animal who might be unfriendly. For though the cat was number one, there were other things in the woods that chased mice, and as she did all this, she worried about Timothy and hoped that Mr. Ages would know something about that would help him. Hey, Scrat. It was more than 2 hours later that she saw that she was getting close to the brick wall where he lived. Though her husband had been a great friend of Mr. Ages, and he had visited him often, Mrs. Frisby herself, he's on the back of the chair. Scrat, what are you doing? Come on, kiddo. Oh, are you going to come? Okay, guys, I guess. Are you going to come? No? Okay. Thought he was going to come say hi again. Let's see, where I lost mine. Mrs. Frisby herself had been there only once, and that had been in the summer. Still, she remembered the place clearly. No, I'm past that part. Sorry, guys. Let's see, I kind of lost my place. All right, but in the winter it had a bleak and almost ghostly look from the blossoms and the green leaves were gone, and only the dry skeletons of the leaves stood, hung with stalks and seeds and pods that rattled in the wind. It was from those seeds and others, and from the flowers and roots beneath them, that Mr. Ages made the draughts and powders that could sometimes save the sick from dying. The time... Are you going to come? You want to come say hi to everybody? No? Here. Are you going to be friendly? Just going to walk across my desk. The time she had been here before, that was for Timothy too, when he was only a baby. Don't take one of my pens. No, Scrat. Now he's going to come and knock. What do you want, baby? I'm sorry, guys. I'm getting distracted. That's my fault, not yours. And he's on me again. Hi, baby. You gonna get on my head? Okay. That time her husband Mr. Frisby had been alive, and between them, taking turns, they had managed to carry Timothy to Mr. H's house. It was a sad and frightening journey, and when they arrived, they had been afraid. I'm sorry, guys. He's being a little naughty. Okay. It was a sad and frightening journey, and when they arrived, they had been afraid he might already be dead. Mr. Ages looked at him, examined his tongue, felt his pulse, and felt a small red lump near his neck. Spider, he said, not a black widow, but bad enough. He had forced a few drops of a milky liquid into Timothy's mouth and held him upright so that it could trickle down his throat, for Timothy could not swallow. In a few minutes his small muscles had unlocked, and he was able to move his arms and legs. He'll be all right, said Mr. Ages, but weak for a few hours. For those of you that lost had a hard time paying attention because of Scrat, I will keep you up to date. What had happened is, because I even got a little distracted myself. Mr. Ages, apparently they're talking about when Timothy was sick before, when Mr. Frisby, the dad, was still alive, and what they did before he had gotten bit by a spider, apparently. So this isn't currently as he's ill. This was a time before when Mr. Frisby, the mouse, the daddy mouse, was still alive. The trip back home had been a happy one, and the other children were wide-eyed with joy to see Timothy alive, yet Mrs. Frisby thought this had been the beginning of his frailness. From that time on, he tended to stumble a little when he walked, especially when he was tired. He never grew as big or as vigorous as his brother Martin, but he thought a great deal more, and in that he resembled his father. Now we're current. Now she reached Mr. Ages' house, a hole in the brick wall where one end of the heavy floored beam had once rested. It was about 2 feet below the top of the wall, and one reached in by climbing down a sort of rough stairway of broken brick ends. She knocked on his door, made of a piece of shingle. Oh, let him be in, please, she thought, but he was not. There was no answer, so she sat down to wait on the narrow ledge of brick in front of his door. Half an hour passed, and the sun sinking lower in the west all the time before she heard a light scratching noise up above, and there he came, carrying a cloth sack bulging with some kind of lumpy material. His fur was a soft gray-white, and so glossy he seemed to almost glow. Mrs. Frisby had heard that Mr. Ages was not truly a white mouse. That is, he had not been born with white fur, but had turned white from old age. Whether this was so or not, she did not know. Certainly he seemed very old and very wise, yet he walked nimbly enough. Oh, Mr. Ages, I'm so glad you've come, she said. I don't suppose you remember me, Mrs. Frisby? Of course I remember you, and I was sad to hear about poor Mr. Frisby. How is your young son Timothy, was it? It's about him I've come to you. He's taken terribly sick. Has he? I was afraid he might turn out to not be as strong as the others. I hoped you might be able to help him. That may be. Come in, please, so I can put down this sack. Mr. Ages' house, somewhat larger than a shoebox, but about the same shape, resembled the house of a hermit. It was bare furniture except for a bit of bedding in one corner, a stool made of a piece of brick, and another piece of brick worn smooth from use of a pestle on which he ground out his medicines. Along one entire wall, ranged neatly in small piles, stood the raw materials he had collected: roots, seeds, dried leaves, pods, strips of bark, and shriveled mushrooms. To this row he now added the contents of his sack. It held a number of small plants, all of them the same kind, with stringy roots and dark veins, green leaves that looked like mint. So, as you can see, there's Mrs. Frisby, there's Mr. Ages. You can see he's a white mouse, and they even kind of made him look older if you kind of look around the way they did the illustration there. Pipsua, said Mr. Agnes. Botanically, Chimaphila umbellata. It says it stays green all winter and makes a very useful spring tonic. I may have mispronounced that. So it's a medical term. Most people use only the leaves, but I have found the roots even more effective. He arranged the plants in an orderly pile, but that's not what you're here for. What's wrong with young Timothy? He has a very high fever. He's delirious. I don't know what to do. How high? So high that he feels burning hot to the touch, runs with perspiration. Perspiration is sweat, by the way. And yet he shivers with cold at the same time. Keep him wrapped up in a warm blanket. I do. And his pulse? So fast that you cannot tell one heartbeat from the next. His tongue? So coated that it looks purple. How does he breathe? He breathes very rapidly, and the air rasps in his chest. He said at first that he could not get his breath. But does he cough? No. He has pneumonia, said Mr. Ages. I have some medicine that will help him, but the most important thing is to keep him warm, and he must stay in bed. He went to the back of his house, and from a ledge formed by a projecting brick, he took 3 packets of medicine, Powders neatly wrapped in white paper. Give him one of these tonight. Mix it in water and make him drink it. If he is still delirious, hold his nose and pour it down his throat. Give him the second one tomorrow morning and the third the next morning. Mrs. Frisby took the packages. Will he get better? She asked, dreading to hear the answer. He will get better this time. His fever will be less on the second day and gone the third, after he has taken all the medicine. That does not mean he will have recovered. His lungs will still be terribly weak and sensitive. If he gets the least bit cold or breathes cold air, even a breath or two, the pneumonia will surely come back worse than before. And the second time he may not recover. This will be true for at least 3 weeks and more likely a month. And after that? Even after that he should be careful, though we may hope by then the weather will be warmer. By now the sun was getting low in the west, settling into the high mountains beyond the woods. Mrs. Frisby thanked Mr. Ages and set out for home as quickly as she could go. I'm going to go and stop there. The next chapter says The Crow and the Cat. Of course, it looks backwards for you guys, but that's what it says. I'm just going to go and stop there. It looks like we've already been on here 25 minutes, and that's usually longer than what I normally do. As you can see, I have a little squirrel, Scrat. Kiddo, come here, come here, come here. Come down. You want to come down and say hi? Come on, come on. You want to come down and say hi to everybody? He likes to nibble. It doesn't really hurt, actually. All right, guys. Well, you want to say anything, Scrat? Scrat? No, he's just going to sit up there. All right, guys. Once again, if you want to continue to follow, if you like these videos, if you want me to do more, I will continue to do them. But I need a thumbs up on the little thumbs up down below. And hit the subscribe button. And once again, this is Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of Nimh by Robert O'Brien. Oh, here he comes again. Sorry, guys. He's been very, he's been distracting me. I never knew if I'd be able to bring him on or not. He's a little more wild than his sister. Scrat, you want to come up? I guess that's it, guys. Well, I'll go ahead and let you go for now. So, oh. I love you guys. So I will see you later. Bye-bye.